Hey Bulldogs, I'm coming at you back from STEM for a really quick video on common sense, a 47-page pamphlet written by Thomas Paine and published on January 10th of 1776. So let's give you a little bit of background. When this was published in January of 1776, it was over a year between the outbreak of armed conflict and the Declaration of Independence, right? That hasn't even happened yet. So there was a good amount of time. And during these 15 months, many Americans still did not want independence. You know, they were upset about taxes, but they were fine. They appreciated the protection that Britain gave them. They were loyal to the crown, and there was tension, but the call for independence didn't really reach out, didn't speak to a lot of people. And some of these colonies disagreed about their ideas of a shared future. They still saw themselves as very independent and separate from one another. And they didn't all have this common goal to break free from England. Elbridge Gerry, who's pictured here, he wrote, "Some timid minds are terrified at the word independence. America has gone such lengths she cannot recede, and I am convinced a few weeks or months at furthest will convince her of the fact. But the fruit must have time to ripen in some of the other colonies." So some people saw that, independence is coming. There's no way to avoid it. But some of the colonies just weren't quite there yet. They weren't as fired up as maybe you saw that the people were in Massachusetts. So what did they really need to do to get those people on board? Well, one big way to get them on board is by appealing to the people. And Thomas Paine was English. He came to the American colonies in November of 74, right around when the battles of Lexington and Concord were happening. But the tensions are starting to brew. They're getting more intense in those 2 years. He was an enlightened thinker, and he wrote this pamphlet. Now, it sold over 120,000 copies in just the first few months. And to this day, it's one of the most published ever pieces of American writing. Some historians debate the numbers, but I think within 1 year, about 500,000 copies were printed. The colonial population at the time was only 2.5 million. So this is a very big percentage. And if people didn't read it for themselves, other people that did read it shared it with others. They went to their taverns, they went to their churches, and they shared what was in the message here. So most people were familiar with this work in one way or the other. Also, even newspapers. There was a newspaper in Connecticut that in February just published the whole thing right there in the newspaper. And the price was made low so that your average person could afford it. Were a lot of people illiterate at that time? Yeah, but one way or another, people learned about it. There were many reprintings in Pennsylvania, throughout the other colonies, even in Europe. France was a big reader of this. So there were 4 sections that Thomas Paine divided this into. And I'm not going to get into all the sections, but what this was about was that he rallied the common people. How do you get the average colonial American on board with independence? And there's a few methods he used. He gave them an ultimatum. He said, you can, the time of the olive branch, the time of reconciling, that's done. If we don't go for independence now, forget it. We're going to be cowards, and our children are going to have to live under this tyranny, and they will not have liberty. And do we really want to do that for them? The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind, really appealing to this idea that this was an alarm to the world, which you see in a lot of the founders' writings, that this is not just an American cause, it's a human cause, it's a universal cause. Another big method he used to get people aboard was using biblical passages. Alluding stories from the Bible as to why they should refute the king. And we've learned about already this year that, the people were reading the Bible. They were Christian. And this was a very effective way to get them to agree. If you're a good Christian, basically, you're going to want independence. Ironically, he was not really a Christian himself. He was considered a deist. And eventually, despite so many people are reading this, people turned against him because he was so anti-Bible. He actually didn't even like the Bible himself. Only 6 people even attended his funeral. He was so ill-liked by the time of his death. Remind to ask me in class what happened to his body when he died. It sounds like a weird question, but you'll probably find the story interesting. But anyway, He himself wasn't much of a Christian, but he knew most colonials were, and he used that to persuade them. So what did he write about? He refuted ideas against independence. All the reasons people said they wanted to stay a colony, this is the reason why it's wrong. He said not only is independence possible, but it's necessary. And he said monarchies are stupid, they're useless, not just the British monarchy, but all monarchies, and like, enough. So remember, a lot of the people were not discussing independence yet. They were not liking these taxes, but they were not saying, well, we want to be independent. They just wanted to stop these taxes. They wanted representation. So this was radical, right? Think of extreme. The idea is like, no, we should break free. We should completely just change our allegiance and our form of government. This is not just an idea. It's a radical message. And we really need to look at how we viewed these revolutionaries. How would we view them in our eyes today, right? This is a radical idea. Some people thought it was too radical. Even people like John Adams, who became our second president, thought like this is, right? Not everyone agreed with this message he was writing. John Adams was pro-independence, but he just didn't like common sense very much. And what this did is it appealed to a broad section of the population, not just people in Virginia, not just people in Massachusetts, not just merchants, right? But your farmers in backwoods areas. It appealed to them. Something to think about. We talked a lot about how much history there is in Philadelphia, right? When we looked at that American Revolution Museum, what do we decide to preserve, and what don't we decide to preserve? Here's an example where he wrote this in Philadelphia. It's now a parking lot, so something to think about. All right, we'll talk about more of this in class, guys. See you soon.